This Monday morning. It's a brand new week, start of the week. First things first, let's turn on my clock. I was sitting here thinking there's something missing. And then I realized my big clock's not turned on. Now I have the clock, now I know. What? I was thinking, I wonder what the time is. And there's a big clock. This is Backchannel. I'm Anthony. It's 9 o'clock here on the West Coast. We're going to talk about Russia opening safe corridors, which turns out are not safe at all. Because they're filled with landmines. They've been shelling people as they walk through these safe corridors. It's insane. This is really not good. I have to tell you this. I'm really starting to worry about what's happening over there. There's a ton of energy to help Ukraine in Congress this week, but the big question remains, what can they get done? Elon Musk chooses his side between Russia and Ukraine. Find out what that is. And also it's Women's History Month. World-renowned performer, World War II spy, and activist. A few of the titles used to describe Josephine Baker. So we'll be discussing her and her life and legacy in just a little while. If you'd like to get in touch, you know how to do that. Just wake up your Echo Show if you have one, and then say the word "say" followed by your message. You're welcome to go on our web chat facility at backchannel.tv. And finally, you can follow the show on YouTube if that's the way you're doing things. So if you message me, I'll see it. It'll appear on here, and I can talk about you, introduce you, and make you part of the show in any way that you see fit. Anything you want to comment along the way, you're welcome to. Free speech and all that, so knock yourself out. We're going to take a look at the local papers. We're going to move to the Abilene Reporter news first. They start with attacks, halt, evacuations. Yes, it says a second attempt to evacuate civilians from a besieged city in southern Ukraine collapsed on Sunday amid renewed Russian shelling, while Russian President Vladimir Putin turned the blame for the war back on Ukraine and said the invasion could be halted only if Kiev ceases hostilities, which is ironic, really, seeing as they are non-hostile. What do you do, It says food, water, medicine, and almost all other supplies were in desperately short supply in the besieged port city of Mariupol, where Russian and Ukrainian forces had agreed to an 11-hour ceasefire that would allow civilians, and the wounded to be evacuated. But Russian attacks quickly closed the humanitarian corridor. There can be no green corridors because only the sick brain of the Russians decides when to start shooting and at whom, the Interior Ministry Anton Gerashchenko said on Telegram. So, this is very worrying, because they're basically breaking all of the rules of the various conventions that are in place, the human rights and United Nations, Geneva, all of these various agreements in place about how modern warfare is conducted. Putin's basically ignoring them all, and that's the worry. The Amazing World of Puppets. There's 300 puppets on display at Breckenridge Fine Arts Centre in Abilene. Such is the contrast of the local newspaper. You couldn't make it up. Paxton Bush come out swinging as race goes to runoff. This is the Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton. He weakened by legal problems and forced into a runoff in the GOP primary. Came out swinging against his opponent in the May 24th overtime election, George P. Bush, who also wasted no time going on the attack. So there we go. Is George P. Bush one of the Bush dynasty? I don't know. I don't know that he is. I mean, he looks like he could be a Bush, but, who knows? I do find these dynasties, these kind of, Clinton dynasty and Bush dynasty and dynasty, dynasty, as you say. It's very interesting to me, I feel like also that's another reason why people didn't vote for Hillary Clinton. They're just done with the dynasties. It's almost like they feel like there's inherent corruption in a dynasty, and it's actually not true, but it is a bit weird that people kind of make these connections. Oh, he's Jeb's oldest son. Okay, so Jeb is H.W. Bush's brother, and so this is the nephew of the former president. It's a dynasty. Let's go to the Corpus Christi Caller Times. They lead with Russian attacks halt plans to evacuate civilians. Zelensky encourages his people to fight. Also, when women vote, women win is the headline. A march for the vote kicks off Women's History Month. Yes, members of the community marched and celebrated in downtown Corpus Christi on Saturday in remembrance of the 1913 Women's March on Washington and the start of Women's History Month. Attendees at the March for the Vote, it's a good name, isn't it? March for the Vote, were able to parade around the park, shop from local women's-owned vendors, register to vote, eat from food trucks, and listen to speakers and live music from Chicas Rock. Love them. So that's what's happening down in Corpus Christi. Let's move on, paper-wise, anyway. San Diego. Oh, no, hang on. Hold your horses. Fort Worth Star-Telegram. I'm going to Fort Worth now, Texas. Women billed while miscarrying at local hospital. What? Cara Garden knew there would be blood, cramps and grief. Her doctor had confirmed the worst. She was about 9 weeks pregnant. She needed to find the time to take the pills that would allow the miscarriage, instead of possibly waiting days or even weeks for the miscarriage to happen naturally. I'm trying to get to the point of this story rather than reading you a whole list of personal items. Do you know what I mean? It says, even though the doctor had warned her about the drug's effects and the process of miscarrying, Gardeem was still shocked. She... This is a little explicit to read out loud this morning. I should have pre-read this, really. Not wanting to wait another day, she drove herself to the emergency room. That's basically what happened. And then she got a huge bill for it. I mean, that's just the insanity of this. You know? She was confronted about payment while in the exam room. Something she wants to see changed. This is basically a woman that had a problematic miscarriage, needed to get emergency treatment. And, you have to think about the emotional toil on a woman at this moment in her life. And then she's confronted about payment in the exam room. I mean, I have to say I've experienced this myself, not something as significant as this. But, my daughter burned herself. And, again, emergency room. And, the girl's crying and screaming and in pain, and they're like, right, have you got your credit card? It's like, really? Really? This is why I maintain that there is no American healthcare system. It doesn't exist. There is no American healthcare system. There's an American health system. Actually, that's not true. There's American health. But there's not a system. There's no system. Anyway, hopefully Cara Gardeem is, in a better place now. High courts to hear local Native American adoption case. It says the U.S. Supreme Court announced this week it will hear a case involving a Fort Worth couple's adoption of a native child that experts say has the ability to undermine Native American sovereignty. What? On one side of the legal case stand Native American tribes, child welfare groups, and the Indian Child Welfare Act, a federal law designed to prioritize Native American families in the adoption of native children. On the other side of the case, which originated in Fort Worth in 2017, are the Fort Worth couple in 3 states, including the state of Texas. You forget about how individual states have, there's so much legislation that is specific to state to state. Is it any wonder that people don't move around that much? It's almost like, learning over, how things operate in a different state, and what the laws are, what the rules are. It's very interesting. Biden doesn't shy from fight over transgender rights, it says, on the front of the newspaper, and Russian attacks halt plans to evacuate Ukrainian civilians. Same story. Let's go to the San Antonio Express News now. This one for Stacey. Stacey, good morning. Marlene's with us as well. Hello, Marlene. Welcome to Backchannel today. San Antonio Express News for Stacey. Nighttime attacks on cities across Ukraine increase. It says 4 days after Russia began dropping artillery shells on Kiev, a restaurateur was wondering why his father, a church custodian living in the Russian city of Nizhny Novgorod, had not called to check on him. There's a war. I'm his son, and he just doesn't call. So he picked up the phone and let his father know that Ukraine was under attack by Russia. I'm trying to evacuate my children and my wife. Everything is extremely scary, he said. He did not get the response that he expected. His father did not believe him. This is happening all the time. He started to tell me how the things in my country are going. He converted his restaurants into volunteer centers and is temporarily staying near the western Ukrainian city of Ternopil. He started to yell at me and told me, look, everything is going like this. They are Nazis. This is what Putin has told the Russian people, that Ukrainians are Nazis, and there is a Nazi regime, and Zelensky is a Nazi, and they don't have access to regular mainstream information. And for all the people that knock the mainstream media, it's at times like this we actually need it. Russian state media. You know, a limit on social media. Imagine living in a country where the information you receive is completely contrasting to the rest of the world. And it's your reality. It's just your reality. Yeah, I mean, it's brainwashing. I interviewed a cult expert, Stephen Hassan, the other day about this on another show. And I'll be honest with you, what I didn't realize about how this happens in Russia is the fact that if you, let's say, are privy to other information, or you are the truth kind of gets to you in some way, you can't share it. Because if you share it, your own family member might report you to the authorities. Because they live in such fear, so the secret is just to be a good citizen. And by being a good citizen, then you don't get arrested, and then you don't get, questioned, and you don't get into trouble. You just be a good citizen. You just play along. Is it any wonder that, there are any Russians still left in Russia? I mean, why would you stick around for that? But you don't know any different. Because this regime has been in place for your entire life. Carol's joined us from Florida. Hi, Carol. Welcome to Backchannel. Ever been to Russia? Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and this happens. I mean, we know it happens in China as well. You've seen that kind of blind adoration of the president in China. President Xi. I mean, they basically idolize him. And if us Westerners will be like, do you really idolize him, or are you just kind of saying it? They'd be like, no, of course we do. The brainwashing is at such a level that it is impossible for Westerners to understand quite how another country can operate with humans that are the same as us. We're all the same. And yet conditioning and mind control and brainwashing is responsible for the way in which we live our lives. I never tire of this subject. Also on the front of the San Antonio Express News this morning, teachers don't see evaluations as fair amid pandemic. It says Sarah Zimmerman received top ratings on her teacher evaluation last year. Her evaluator, she said, was impressed. She could navigate Zoom so seamlessly while teaching virtually and in person at the same time. Zimmerman didn't think she deserved it. A 6th grade maths teacher at Tafela Middle School in San Antonio Independent School District. She saw that she got higher praise than more experienced teachers, and she thought the evaluation system was missing something. Yes, state made the annual reviews no longer optional. A lot changed for education during the pandemic, And geekdom turns eyes south for more tech workers, is the headline. Rackspace Technology co-founder Graham Weston had faced years of hiring problems in San Antonio. Rackspace struggled to find workers for its Windcrest headquarters, largely because the area had few early and mid-stage technology companies, seedbeds for the talent it needed to compete with Amazon Web Services. Yes, Amazon Web Services is, of course, where Amazon really makes most of its money. They do the back end of other people's websites and logistics, and it's very, very interesting. Amazon even does the back end for like government websites, for the US government. I mean, their tech is so intricate, so like well tested now that it's like, why waste your time trying to build the back end yourself when you can just like use AWS? It's just interesting to me. Ukraine civilian toll spikes on the front of the LA Times. A very tragic photograph of 3 members of a family killed when an incoming mortar round struck as they tried to flee. I mean, how is it possible that this is even a thing? Human lives just completely wiped out in an instant. The town on Kiev's northwestern flank saw fierce clashes between Ukrainian and Russian troops. Zelensky again urges the West to impose a no-fly zone. It says with Russian troops besieging cities in Ukraine's south, spurring a humanitarian catastrophe, even as they press their offensive around the capital. Zelensky warned on Sunday that the strategic coastal city of Odessa would soon be under attack. He repeatedly urged Western countries to create a no-fly zone. He said Russians have always visited Odessa, felt only warmth in Odessa, and now what? Bombs on Odessa? Artillery on Odessa? Zelensky said in an impassioned video address. It will be a war crime. It will be a historical crime. His pleas came as Ukrainian authorities tried and failed for a second consecutive day to evacuate civilians from Mariupol and Volnovka. 2 cities in eastern Donetsk region. Mariupol, a port city of 500,000 people, is a key part of Russia's offensive to deny Ukraine any exit to the sea. Ukraine earlier ceasefire there on Saturday broke down with the Ukrainian and Russian sides each accusing the other of violations. I mean, it's just become like hand-to-hand combat now. I've been watching these videos on TikTok is where you find a lot of this stuff. People are posting it. People in the streets, on Ukraine streets, posting TikTok videos of them being hunted down effectively. This is the most insane thing I have ever seen play out on social media. A real-life live warfare, modern warfare, playing out. It's beggars belief that we're sitting and watching this happen, but unfortunately we are tied into a situation that if we take part, if America gets involved, then you're going to really, Putin will open the taps. This is why they have nuclear weapons, it's to prevent these types of threats from escalating. It's the ultimate defense, isn't it? And tragically, it could escalate so quickly. If Biden does anything, it could escalate so quickly. And some people are, some people are saying the no-fly zone is pointless because much of the shelling is going on from ground-to-air missiles, or ground-to-ground missiles, and that really there's not that many warplanes being used anyway. Answers sought after soccer riot. Mexicans mourn brawl among fans. Question that there were no deaths. Yes, images coming out of the main soccer stadium in the central Mexican city of Querétaro are as indelible as they are indefensible. It says on Saturday, early in the second half of a Mexican League game between visiting Atlas, the reigning champion, and Querétaro FC, a team that has never finished better than 6th in the standings. A riot broke out in Estadio, named after a hero in Mexico's War of Independence. It's called Corregidora. Fans once attacked one another with chairs, metal bars, knives, belts, fists, and feet, with official reports saying as many as 26 people were hospitalized, 3 in a critical condition. A competing report says the number was nearly twice that high. On Sunday, the local government said there were no fatalities, but the images of bloody and unconscious bodies, including one of a man lying naked in a pool of his own blood, as well as interviews with some victims and family members, indicated fans were killed. This is crazy. I'll be honest, I don't know. I feel like when there's a war on and everybody knows about it, stuff like this shouldn't be happening. You know, that's my concern, is that what we should be doing is having some perspective on the fact that innocent people are being killed in one place, and yet here we're trying to kill ourselves. It's just like, give it a rest. Look at the world. There's more important things to do than you guys having a fight over football, soccer. Also on the front of the LA Times this morning, vulnerable patients struggle to find antibody treatment. Leanne Cook was glum but unsurprised when the tests confirmed what she and her doctors had expected, even after 3 shots of a vaccine. She had no antibodies to protect her against COVID-19. Her immune system had been hampered by the drugs she takes for her condition, a rare disease affecting her kidneys. As other vaccinated people began to let down their guard last year, Cook continued to minimize trips outside her home in Mission Vieja. Yeah, it says this drug can protect immunocompromised people from COVID, but many say getting it is too complicated. Interesting. There's more and more drugs hitting the market all the time. You know, the drug companies are like working overtime because there's like money to be made. You know, let's try and cure people. And this is something that's important to qualify, because I think that, you know, pharmaceutical companies get a bad rep. I agree they overcharge. I agree that their morals are sometimes questionable. But fundamentally, in a capitalist system and society, their product does save lives. So this is the system that we have. This capitalist system is what we have. So therefore, we need to accept and understand that it is perfectly legal for pharmaceutical companies to overcharge for their products as and when they want to. You know, unless you want to vote for an alternative system, you know. Which I would do in a heartbeat, incidentally. You know, I think that it's like, you know, Biden in his State of the Union speech the other day was going on about making insulin, capping it at $35 a month. Well, that's how much it always should have been. The reason that people are paying $1,000 a month is because it's all profit. And to think of the mindset of people who are, the mindset of people who are working at pharmaceutical organizations who are charging $1,000 a month for insulin, knowing it's costing them $35. Not even that. You know, a vial of insulin around the world, this is published data. In the UK, it's about £7. In the US, it's $95 for a vial. All over the world, it's super, super cheap. Only America is it that high. So Biden wants to cap it. I don't know if he'll get it done or not, because obviously the Republicans wouldn't want to do that because they don't care about stuff like that. Tony has joined us in California. Mimi's with us as well, also in California. Hello, giving us a little wave. Stacey has to go. Off you go, Stacey. Thank you for being with us. Tutti Frutti joined us as well. We've got Carol and Marlene here. We're just all hanging out, talking about stuff, you know. A new Cold War in Latin America is the headline. El Salvador's president and the Chinese ambassador traded flatteries recently as they broke ground on a new national library, one of a slew of gifts China has promised this small mountainous nation as part of its vigorous quest to gain influence across Central America. Yes, as they smiled for photos, the ambassador offered greatest respect for the president, a polarizing leader who has assailed El Salvador's democratic institutions and clashed repeatedly with U.S. officials. I mean, the world is in turmoil. It really is. I mean, what is this? GOP pushes crime atop 22 issue, it says. A little scene attack ad roasting State Attorney General Rob Bonta, as an anti-cop politician may just be a blip in the social media universe, but it serves as a flashing neon sign warning Democrats what to expect in California's election season. How can someone who cares more about criminals' rights than victims' rights and is routinely at odds with law enforcement serve as our state's top cop? The ad said it's time for a change. Well, the criticism comes from an independent political committee backing Attorney General candidate Anne Marie Schubert, the Republican-turned independent district attorney of Sacramento County. The ad also takes a swipe at Governor Gavin Newsom, who faces a similar barrage from the right in his run for re-election for promising to close 2 prisons, imposing a moratorium on the death penalty, and appointing Bonta as the state's top cop. I mean, you know what really is so tragic for me about all of this? You know, it's making a viral video about an anti-cop politician, which is obviously not true. There's just no intellectualism left in any of these debates. Like, there is not an ounce of intellectual analysis. Not an ounce. It's like everybody got hit with a dumb stick. There's nothing. There's literally nothing. There used to be a time when we were interested enough to debate and really form opinions based on our own feelings, gut, instinct. Also, what we've read doesn't happen anymore. They make a viral video saying, "This guy hates cops." It's not true. It's a bit like the kind of, how the right took hold of the defund the police movement. Didn't understand what it was. I mean, or they did, and they chose to ignore it. Right? They thought that it meant defund the police, and it didn't. It meant refund the police, redistribute funds for the police, put more funds into social care, mental health well-being, and less funds into buying military equipment to militarize the police. That's what it meant. But nobody cared to even do any intellectual analysis. Everybody was like, yeah, top line, that's all they care about. I mean, admittedly, the Democrats are not very good at branding things, and defund the police was probably a bad name. But that's not the point. The point is what it means is more important than what it is, you know? You shouldn't have to write it on the tin. Otherwise, the Trump organization would be called the fascist organization. Do you know what I mean? It's like you have to really think very hard about everything. Don't just blurt stuff out. Think about it. Engage your brain. And life will be better for everybody. The Sacramento Bee this morning leads with Russian attacks halt plans to evacuate Ukrainian citizens. This is the same story from the Associated Press that appears on several of the newspapers this morning. Death toll near 6 million people as pandemic enters 3rd year. That's right, 3 years now of COVID-19 pandemic. 6 million people dead around the world. Do you know something? They have, I think it was The Economist has done a tally. They reckon that the actual number of people that have died from COVID is actually around 25.5 million. When you take into account all of the people that died because they couldn't get into hospital with their other ailment because the hospital was overrun with COVID patients, that's a death because of COVID. COVID has caused 25.5 million deaths, they reckon. There's a headline here about SEIU 1000. What is that? CU 1000. I don't know what it is. Anyway, it says CU Local 1000 President Richard Lewis Brown and about 20 of his supporters occupied the union's Sacramento headquarters. Oh, it's a union. It's a union. Sacramento EI something union. It's like a guessing game here. It's a problem with the local newspapers. They just presume that everybody knows, but I don't know because I'm not really local. Brown had been locked out of the building since early in the week. 3 union vice presidents locked him out after taking action to suspend him, saying he spent union money improperly, mishandled lawsuits, and shut out other union officials from leadership. The events were the latest escalation in a messy power struggle between Brown, who was elected 9 months ago to a 3-year term, leading the union representing 100,000 state employees, and a group of board members who have accused him of harming the union's reputation and preventing them from fulfilling their something. Page 5. Sacramento to open new weather relief centers for homeless after months of delays. The city this week approved plans to open a homeless weather homeless weather respite center in North Sacramento, but only on days when certain temperature thresholds are met. The site will be located at the city-owned former Powerhouse Science Center. That's good. So that's Sacramento. Let's move on to San Diego now. We're kind of whizzing around California, as only we know how. Tony and Mimi are hanging out with us right now. Tutti Frutti as well. Carol, welcome. First time on the show. Great to see you. San Diego Union Tribune this morning. Vaccine rates for Black SD, San Diego residents, stay low. It says after a year-long outreach campaign and $6 million in county funding, COVID-19 vaccination rates for Black San Diegans stepped up a little, but are still hovering around 50%, far below most other Democratic groups in the county. Two community organizations, the Multicultural Health Foundation and Mental Health America, received county contracts to provide vaccine outreach, education, and information directed at Black communities. Those contracts ended in December, just as the Omicron variant began to surge. Organizers say they're not done. They're still trying to keep boots on the ground to get shots in arms, and the foundation is still trying to raise money to support its outreach. We can't give up on people, they said. I mean, we've talked before about why Black people are less likely to get vaccinated, or less, they desire it less, and quite rightly so. But, because of historic testing on Black people by white people for various diseases over the decades. But this isn't that. And therefore, the job of these organizations, these outreach community organizations, the Multicultural Health Foundation and Mental Health America, they need to take a very different approach. I mean, their contracts are up now, but it's like, I just think, well, they failed, didn't they? If only 50% have gone for it, they failed. Wars civilian toll mounts in Ukraine. Russian forces intensified shelling in cities in Ukraine's center, north and south. A Ukrainian official said, upending attempts to evacuate besieged civilians, with the Ukrainian leader urging his people to fight in the streets. Russian President Vladimir Putin shifted blame for the invasion, saying the attacks could be halted only if Kiev ceases hostilities. The outskirts of Kiev, Chernihiv in the north, Mykolaiv in the south, Kharkiv, the country's second largest city, faced stepped-up shelling late on Sunday. Heavy artillery hit residential areas in Kharkiv, and shelling damaged a television tower. I mean, the whole point of this was that Russia was only going to be taking out military targets. That was what they said. That was the original plan. That was manageable, right? But now it's a free-for-all. They're just going for it. And the crazy thing is that a lot of the, if not all of the Russian troops that are there, they're now being met with civilians on their feet, unarmed, not surrendering, but saying, don't come forward, we are unarmed. And they're listening for the first time to Ukrainians talking in Russian to explain to Russian troops what is really happening in the country, because the Russian troops have been brainwashed. And so Russian troops are coming up against this for the first time. And there's a whole bunch of Russian troops that have been captured. And there was a video yesterday of a Russian military guy who'd been captured, and he's like, they've shown me the truth. And he put out this 5-minute video of him talking, saying, I had no idea. We were told something else. And now I know what the truth is. It was harrowing. This conflict of information. It's crazy how Russians can have a completely different narrative of the reality. I mean, you and I know that Volodymyr Zelensky is like the sweetest guy. He's like the last person that would ever be a dictator or authoritarian, right? He's this lovely former comic actor, unassuming, unwitting war hero of Ukraine. Last man standing. And Putin has made out that he is somebody else. We have no idea how the Russians are digesting the news. It's a completely different landscape. U.S. confronts new Russia-China alliance. It says for much of the past year, the Navy and Marine Corps in the Pacific have trained for a conflict with the Pentagon's most powerful potential adversary, China. Now, the invasion of Ukraine by Russia, another near-peer nation and newly aligned partner of China, has raised the stakes of such exercises and stoked fears among some that a Pacific confrontation might be closer than expected if China makes a similar move against Taiwan. Well, that's going to happen. Trust me, all of your worst fears are going to play out. China will definitely go for Taiwan. Russia is definitely going to go for neighboring countries. Definitely. I'm telling you, this is, he's got a bee in his bonnet now. Putin has a bee in his bonnet. He's going for it. SDSU professor reassigned over epithets used in class. It says, for the second time in less than a year, San Diego State University has reassigned a teacher for using racially charged language in the classroom. The new incident involves J. Angelo Corlett, a tenured philosophy professor who last week was relieved of his duties teaching two courses, one on critical thinking and the other on race and racism. Corlett told the San Diego Union Tribune that he used an informational slide in both classes that listed 10 to 12 epithets that have been used against Black, Hispanic, Latino, Asian, and white people. You have to mention the words in order to explain why they are racist and should not be used, said Corlett, a 63-year-old Latino. Some students are confused about what counts as racism, and some are more concerned about being offended than learning about the logic and science of language. On the 1st of March, an unidentified black student who was not registered in Corlett's critical thinking course stopped by and repeatedly challenged Corlett's mention of these words, particularly one regarded as the most offensive slur against black people. I mean, look, I'm with the tutor here. It's painful, but it has to be said. You have to educate. It is helpful that he's Latino, of course it is. But I really feel like we are, again, what I was saying earlier about this total lack of intellectual analysis of anything. It's all top line. He's being racist. No, he's teaching racism. He's teaching about the horrors of systemic racism. And therefore, he's identifying a dozen words that are used. This is the essential education that we need. He's not teaching us the words. He's teaching us the meaning of the words, the history of the words, the importance of the words, and also the misuse of the words. I don't know. I just feel like we are living in a parallel universe these days. He does look like a nice guy. I mean, it's hard to judge, but, he looks like a nice guy. Okay, let's move on. That was the Union Tribune for San Diego. Next up is the Canton Repository. Renkert Building closer to becoming hotel. The Renkert Building's another step to becoming a hotel with event space and a restaurant. That's exciting. Might make me want to head there right now. Right now. To 306 Market Avenue. Familiar voice goes silent. This is a radio caller, Eddie Gosh, who was a friend to all. There's always a radio caller in every town. It says, Eddie Gosh's friends are a little sadder. The cadre of the McKinley High Sports Faithful is a touch thinner, and the call-in segments on local radio airwaves a bit quieter. He died last month, aged 73. He was calling into the radio for decades. Russian attacks halt Ukrainian evacuation plans. Same story, different headline. And 7 dead as tornado hits central Iowa. Worst storms in state since 2008. Okay, next, bring it on. Columbus, Ohio, the dispatch there. Who is state's rural higher ed serving? Missions of OU, Shawnee State diverge, it says. Permit backlog, risking asylum seekers' jobs. 350 affected at Honda's 2 Ohio factories alone. And a photograph of a Venezuelan immigrant who, like his wife, works at the Honda factory, spends time with his son at their apartment, and they are, waiting. Says he's working as a forklift operator at the plant. He earned $17 an hour to support his family. He didn't know when he'd be allowed back into the factory because of this delay in getting a permit, a work permit. And also, feds won't okay delay for overseas Ohio ballots. There's a lot of interesting stuff happening now regarding the vote. It says the United States Department of Defense denied Ohio's request to delay sending ballots to military and overseas voters amid the chaos of trying to hold a primary without finalized state house and congressional maps. Ohio Secretary of State Frank LaRose had asked federal officials to relieve some pressure on election officials already overwhelmed by missed deadlines and on an extremely tight turnaround to hold a complete May 3rd primary without certainty that the most recent maps will be the final ones. So there we go. There we go. Columbus. Ooh, St. Lucie News Tribune for Florida. Now, I love it when we get to Florida. It's like, I know we've arrived. When we get to Florida, we've arrived. Missed opportunities as culture war simmered, session ignored other issues. This is a story. It says it was supposed to be a quiet election year, legislative session in Florida. Instead, to borrow from Shakespeare, the GOP majority in the legislature decided to cry havoc and let slip the dogs of culture war. Emotionally charged issues have dominated, as reflected in news coverage, with full frontal assaults on abortion access, woke culture, and immigration. Experts say Governor Ron DeSantis and legislative leaders used the 2022 session to go shopping for voters in the fall campaign and possibly beyond. And with all priorities, there's the cost of other opportunities, according to advocates for business, workers, the disabled, and the environment, to name a few. Meanwhile, the state's insurance market continues to crumble, an eviction crisis is brewing for the state's working class, and pollution continues to foul Florida's waterways. Yeah. This is the thing, Ron DeSantis, he loves to kind of play governor, but the reality is his state is in a state. Endangered shark meat added to pet food, a study has found, are Fluffy and Fido wolfing down jaws? Could be, it says. Actually, it's a 1 in 3 chance that the pet food you're giving to your dog or cat includes protein from an endangered shark, according to a new study from Yale. It used DNA barcoding to find that almost a third of pet food samples bought in Singapore contained shark meat. But the shark in pet food problem bites way beyond Singapore. Similar studies in America show our pet food labels often deceive us. I used to buy pet food. I had a cat, and I used to buy pet food, and I would go to an Eastern European supermarket and buy the cheapest stuff they had, and the cat loved it. It was like crack. Cat loved it. Carla's ex bought cat food for a dog. That's how I can summarize that story, Carla. Economy of words. Carla's ex bought cat food for a dog. It's like I'm a copywriter. I strip out all the extraneous words and just break it down into 5 words. Carla's ex bought cat food for a dog. I should write headlines for the Daily Mirror. Russian shelling halts evacuations. Also the same story on the front of the newspaper. This is the Orlando Sentinel. Men with breast cancer aren't alone, but can feel that way. This is a very serious story, obviously. People forget that men can get breast cancer. This is a story about a guy who had stage 4 breast cancer. He didn't think men could get the disease. And insurance... Yeah, he's had a brave photograph taken. He had a lump on his breast removed and has a family history of breast cancer. Insurance companies face rate hikes. It says for home insurance customers, the hits just keep on coming. On top of a series of steep rate increases over the past few years, now come surcharges to clean up messes left behind by failed insurance companies. Orlando-based St. John's Insurance Company, one of the 10 largest Florida insurers with more than 204,600 policies statewide as recently as 2019, went into receivership late last month after losing financial stability rating by analysis firm Demotech. Also, what are NFTs and what do they mean for the world of art? For centuries, collectible art has come in the form of canvases and prints that can range from hundreds of dollars to hundreds of millions of dollars, pieces that might live in a museum or on the walls of someone's home. The most valuable of these pieces, by the likes of Da Vinci, Jackson Pollock, Rembrandt, Picasso, Van Gogh, have fetched prices as high as $450 million. But now the world of art collecting has a new disruptor that's making waves in the digital world. NFTs. These are non-fungible tokens? Fungible. What's fungible? The non-fungible tokens exist on the blockchain alongside cryptocurrency needed to purchase them, even as Ethereum. I don't know what any of this is. I literally feel like I'm living in a different century. I feel like I've been transported into the Minority Report. What are they talking about? That's right, Melania Trump was selling NFTs, wasn't she? Along with a hat that she ended up buying herself. I don't know what an NFT is. I don't. Locals want truck rest areas near homes closed, is the headline. State transportation officials have identified 11 potential sites along Interstate 4 in central Florida as part of plans to build hundreds of truck parking spaces to help alleviate a dire shortage of places where long-haul truckers can stop to rest. There it is. Who doesn't love a truck stop? I love a truck stop. Are you kidding me? So good. Well, an American truck stop invariably has like a second-rate diner, you know? Has a diner which is invariably like pretty rudimentary, you know? There's not much luxury in there, as in like there's no like memorabilia really. It's just a very basic. They might have booths and a bar to sit at, but it's very basic, you know? A little formica maybe, some leatherette seating. Also quite a limited menu. Pecan pie. Yeah, often on the menu. I visited a lot of truck stops when I did a road trip on Highway 1, you know, on the West Coast. And it was beautiful. It was beautiful. One of the greatest things I've ever done is like drive the Highway 1, you know, over 10 days. And stopping in a different place every night, sleeping over and finding somewhere to stay, and motels and hotels, and just it's amazing fun. I rented a Ford Mustang and did the drive. Great days. Should we look a little bit to Russia and Ukraine now? I think it's worth kind of focusing on a little bit. Obviously, it's the biggest story and the most important one that we look at together today. This is as the Kremlin has been accused of staging a sick stunt after telling Ukrainians who want to flee the brutal Russian invasion of their nation that they're free to enter Russia or Vladimir Putin's puppet state of Belarus. On Monday, Russia's defense ministry announced it would be opening supposedly safe corridors from several Ukrainian cities, including the capital of Kiev, that only lead to Russian or Belarusian territory. The cynical plan was immediately called out by Ukraine and its Western allies. A spokesperson for Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky condemned the plans as completely immoral and accused Russia of attempting to use people's suffering to create a television picture. The UK government minister James Cleverly told the BBC News that the corridor announcement was cynical beyond belief. He added, providing evacuation into the arms of the country that is currently destroying yours is a nonsense. I mean, it's very interesting, isn't it? In addition to the fact that there's now been announcements from the ground that these corridors are actually riddled with landmines, you know? It's a booby trap, effectively. I was watching CNN yesterday. You're watching CNN. I'll be honest, it was just terrible. As in, like, the host, the anchor, didn't know what she was talking about. She kept saying the completely unprovoked attack of Ukraine by Russia. And I was thinking, what do you mean unprovoked? What do you mean unprovoked? This wasn't unprovoked. What do you call Donald Trump's presidency? What do you call all of the failure to manage world affairs over the last 5 years from America's perspective? What do you call Trump blackmailing Zelensky and befriending Putin? This is why it's not unprovoked. It was provoked. This is why you can't have an unstable individual who knows nothing about world politics running the most powerful country in the world. He has destabilized the entire planet. And for CNN to keep going on, oh, it's unprovoked, it's so narrow-minded and short-sighted and thoughtless. You want to talk about the truth? Talk about the truth. But don't dramatize this event as an isolated incident just because it suits your viewers. Take the blame. Accept the fact that 70-odd million people voted for somebody who was a Russian asset to be the President of the United States. Own it. You know, such a short memory. I wouldn't mind, but he's still banging on about how wonderful Putin is, how smart he is, and what a genius he was to make this, to do this invasion in the way that he did. I mean, it's like, really? Like, and the media is just dropping the ball time and time again. And why does this happen? Why? And I would argue that it happens because there's very little joined-up thinking. And also American exceptionalism, which is a well-documented subject. It's something I find very interesting. I try not to talk about it too much because I think it's unfair of me as an immigrant to choose to move to America and then criticize it for being overly exceptional. But American exceptionalism prevents America from dissecting its own inadequacies. And I think coupled with the American dream, you end up with this kind of struggle where, there's this feeling of being the greatest country in the world. And, with the dream, we can achieve anything. We can be the president if we want. Well, yeah, you could, because a former, talk show host pulled it off himself, Anyway, I just, I really felt like people don't understand how CNN is also not as bad as Fox, which is a propaganda channel for the Republican Party, but it is still, it's not a healthy place to get your news from. Somebody asked me the other day, where do we watch good news? As in good coverage of Ukraine. And I said, go to channel4.com/news, and they post videos every day of packages of stories being covered. It's the Channel 4 news station in the UK. It's the best journalism I've ever witnessed, Just very, very well covered and very thoughtful and intellectual and long form as well. Because that's the thing about CNN. They'll have somebody on, they'll interview them for 2 minutes. 2 minutes is not enough to do justice to a story as big as this. Channel 4 News, long form analysis, deep intellectual thinking. Allowing people to think up rather than dumb down. I believe we might not all be the greatest brains, but we all have the capacity to listen and to understand. We might not be able to vocalize, but we can all understand and have compassion and empathy and be educated that way. And this is what I have a problem with the likes of CNN and MSNBC and these kind of, these channels. I just think there's no intellectual analysis. It's just like television, theatre, drama, dramatized, countdown clock, the Situation Room. I don't want that. I want thoughtful, factual, calm analysis of the truth. Talking of which, I think it's time for the US News Update, which is a daily podcast that I do. Just brings you just the facts. In fact, today's episode talks a little bit about how Donald Trump destabilized the world, which is partly why I've spoken about it at this moment, so you can hear definitively what he did over 4 years to basically create this problem that we have now with Ukraine and Russia. Anyway, here it is. It's Monday, March 7, from the Volley Network. This is your daily US News Update. I'm Anthony Davis. From the earliest days of his first presidential campaign, Donald Trump aggressively challenged the pillars of Republican foreign policy that defined the party since World War II. He mocked John McCain's capture during the Vietnam War, validated autocrats with his platitudes, questioned long-time military and security alliances, and embraced an isolationist worldview. And to the horror of many GOP leaders at the time, it worked, resonating with voters who believed in part that a bipartisan establishment in Washington had brokered trade deals that hurt American workers and recklessly stumbled into so-called forever wars. But Russia's brutal invasion of Ukraine is posing a serious test for Trump and his America First doctrine, at a moment when he's eyeing another presidential run and using this year's midterm elections to keep bending the GOP to his will. He's largely alone in his sustained praise of Russian President Vladimir Putin as smart, an assessment he reiterated last week during speeches to donors and conservative activists. The multinational partnerships that Trump repeatedly undermined, meanwhile, have allowed the West to quickly band together to hobble Russia's economy with coordinated sanctions. The NATO alliance, which Trump once dismissed as obsolete, is flexing its strength as a foil to Russia's aggression. It's unclear whether the Western unity that has taken hold against Russia can be sustained if the war escalates, expands beyond Ukraine, or drags on indefinitely. And after 2 decades of US foreign policy failures, many Americans are approaching the moment with caution. Your daily US News Update is part of the Volley Network. To hear my live daily morning show, ask your Amazon Echo device to open Backchannel. There it is. That's the US News Update. You can get it wherever you get your podcasts. And, welcome to, download it and save it and do whatever it is you need to do with it. I'm Anthony Davis. This is the Anthony Davis Show here on Backchannel. Thank you very much for joining the show. We've been looking through the morning papers. We've been looking at your messages. We've also been talking about, and in some detail actually, we've been talking about the Russian-Ukraine crisis. And really just kind of getting our heads around what's happening there and why it is happening in the way that it is happening, if that makes sense to you. I really feel like, people are starting to realize that Putin is not the person that Donald Trump told you that he was. Trump idolized Putin, talked about him like he was a good person, and now we're really seeing what Putin is capable of. And I think a lot of people who supported Trump and thought that was acceptable are now beginning to think, well, hang on a second, maybe, this is not kind of as it should have been, Anyway, it's just worth, it's very interesting to me. It's very much worth kind of, looking at and considering. Taking into account that what we're dealing with here is a man who is not who he says he is, if that makes sense. It's just after 10, 3 minutes after 10 here on the West Coast, 3 minutes after 1 Eastern. Welcome to Backchannel. I'm Anthony Davis. Lots on the menu today, discussing all sorts of things, but mainly we're talking about Ukraine. You're welcome to get in touch in the usual way. We've been looking through the morning papers and also speaking about this particular story But Ukrainian officials said a bread factory has been hit by a Russian airstrike on Monday. That's today, after the country's negotiators assembled for talks with Russian officials after previous rounds that brought no respite in the conflict. The bodies of at least 13 civilians were recovered from rubble after the factory in the town of Makariv in the Kiev region was hit, local emergency services said. 5 people were rescued, and 30 believed to have been in there at the time. Russia earlier offered Ukrainians escape routes to Russia and its close ally Belarus on Monday after weekend evacuation ceasefire attempts failed. In the besieged southern port of Mariupol, hundreds of thousands of people remain trapped without food and water under regular bombardments. A Ukrainian negotiator urged Russia to stop its assault on Ukraine, which the United Nations said has now sent 1.7 million people fleeing to Central Europe. Under the Russian offer, a corridor from the capital of Kiev would lead to Russia's ally Belarus, while civilians from Kharkiv, Ukraine's second biggest city, would be directed to Russia, according to maps published by the RAI news agency. It says a spokesperson for Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said the Russian proposal was completely immoral. I mean, what are they going to do with these people? You know, they're going to arrest them when they come through into Russia or Belarus. I mean, are they actually going to set them free or not? And that's why it's such an interesting concept, you know. That's why this is so screwed up conceptually. It's screwed up because it's like the enemy is effectively offering safe passage into its own country. Yeah, I mean, this is what we're dealing with. Gene, welcome. First time on the show from Michigan. Abu's in Canada. Bella's in Northern Virginia. Solo and Tony and Mimi and Tutti Frutti, thank you for hanging out with us this morning here on Backchannel, just having a little conversation about all of this. It says lawmakers emerged from a weekend briefing with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, further resolved to provide assistance to the country. But as we know, Congress often struggles to move quickly even amid crises. So what's most likely, hiccups to get done? Well, aid in appropriations, that's the first thing. Speaker Nancy Pelosi confirmed that her chamber intends to provide $10 billion in humanitarian, military and economic support for Ukraine as part of the government spending bill it intends to pass this week, assuming the Senate can pass the bill later in the week, which is no sure thing. And the bill will be headed for the White House. Also banning imports of Russian oil. There's been bipartisan interest in both chambers in banning imports of Russian oil. Senator Joe Manchin is leading a bill in the Senate. Yeah, it's hilarious, isn't it? Manchin's doing that, of course, because he's got his own energy company in West Virginia. He's the worst. He really is. Whilst Pelosi confirmed the House is exploring strong legislation to bar energy imports, the House bill would also repeal normal trade relations with Russia and Belarus and begin to cut Russia off from the World Trade Organization. Reconciling all these ideas quickly may be a challenge. It's possible the administration moves on its own here first. The Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, said on Sunday the U.S. is in very active discussions with countries in Europe about banning oil imports, despite the Biden administration's open resistance to the idea previously. Other action that's to be taken, they say we suspect further action to help Ukraine will likely have to wait. Passing the funding bill is likely to occupy the bulk of the Senate's attention this week, and House Democrats will depart Washington on Wednesday for a 3-day retreat. Let's have a look a little bit more at this story about the $10 billion, because it's a lot of money, isn't it? You know, how do you feel about money being sent to Ukraine? You know, because this is tax dollars, of course. You happy with your tax dollars going to Ukraine at a time like this? I mean, I would be. Congressman Richard Neal and Kevin Brady, the Democratic chair and Republican leader of the House Ways and Means Committee, respectively, and Senators Ron Wyden and Mike Crapo, the Democratic chair and Republican ranking members of the Senate Finance Committee, have announced a bipartisan agreement on legislation that will suspend trade relations with Russia and Belarus. It's on day 12 of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Washington is mulling whether to ban Russian oil imports into the U.S. I really feel like all of this stuff should have happened years ago. Do you know what I mean? Like, they knew that Russia was the aggressor. They knew that Russia was had a bad human rights record. They knew that Russia didn't allow free votes, free speech, democratic rights, and all of these things. And yet they continue to trade with them because money and greed is fundamentally more important than anything else. It's the same with Saudi Arabia. Look at Saudi Arabia's human rights record. And yet the US is selling billions of dollars worth of military equipment to them all the time. Thrilled to do it. $600 million worth of missiles recently. Antony Blinken, US Secretary of State, said the US was in active discussions with its European partners, who are much more dependent on Russian oil than the US, and could be pushed into a recession if the US banned imports. About this possible tactic. This morning, it says, sources were telling us that the White House was previously hesitant, given the skyrocketing gas prices across the country. The Biden administration is willing to move forward on a ban without the participation of its European partners. Amid these tensions, Biden had a video teleconference with the leaders of France, Germany, and the United Kingdom. Congress has indicated that it plans to take aggressive action in the Russia-Ukraine conflict, with the $10 billion aid request to Ukraine included in the $1.5 trillion omnibus package that must be passed ahead of the 11th of March deadline for government funding. Yeah, I mean, I presume, I don't really know enough about it, but I presume that Congress will ratify this $10 billion for Ukraine. I mean, it's so obvious that it needs the support, right? Let's talk about Elon Musk, everybody's favorite Tesla owner, SpaceX owner, Solar City owner, the Tony Stark of the business world. He's not a CEO like others. I like to say his critics and his admirers. More than a week after the beginning of the invasion of Ukraine, the billionaire has just proven that he is definitely a CEO in his own right, who does not play in the same court as his peers. If a large number of companies had announced to suspend or stop their activities or their services in Russia, their leaders have not personally taken a position on the Russian war. Well, not so the case with Elon Musk. The controversial businessman has just chosen his side between Russia and Ukraine and made it known to his more than 76 million followers on Twitter. Hold strong Ukraine, posted Tesla's chief executive on Friday night, a message surrounded by 3 Ukrainian flags on the left and 3 others on the right. And in case there were any doubts about his choice, Musk added a second message which he sent to his sympathies to the great people of Russia, who do not want this. Russia continued its broad offensive in Ukraine on Saturday, pummeling cities and towns into rubble, and a limited ceasefire for the besieged southern city of Mariupol, a coastal city, ended nearly as soon as it began. Ukrainian officials said Russia had violated ceasefire agreement. The Russian targeting of civilian infrastructure has set off a mass exodus of panicked people from cities, including Kiev, the capital, and created increasingly dire conditions for those who remain. About 500,000 people in Mariupol were entering their 3rd day without heat, electricity, or water. Musk's choice to side with Ukraine comes days after the billionaire sent Starlink satellite internet access terminals, designed by SpaceX, his other company, to Ukraine. The billionaire has been challenged by Mikhailo Fedorov, a Ukrainian vice prime minister. Musk warned that these Starlink terminals are likely the target of attacks by Russian hackers or malicious actors. Starlink is the only non-Russian communication system still working in some parts of Ukraine, so probability of being targeted is high. Please use with caution, the billionaire warned. Turn on Starlink only when needed and place antenna away as far from people as possible, he said. Place light camouflage over antenna to avoid visual detection. Well, Starlink is the first consumer product from Musk's SpaceX company. It's a high-speed internet system powered by a network of 1,000 small low-orbit satellites. It's like a satellite phone, like in war zones. You would use a satellite phone, which looks like an old-fashioned handset with a thick aerial on it. And that basically means that instead of communicating with local cell towers like we do in cities, this goes straight up to the satellite. You sound a little distant. There's sometimes a delay with it, but it does work. And so what Musk has done with this company Starlink is he's basically created mobile hotspots for people who are in areas where they have no infrastructure. And they set it up with a little aerial, and that talks directly to all of these satellites, and you get high-speed internet. It's very clever, and it's going to form the basis of this new internet that I guess he's going to introduce, which is going to mean that everybody can get fast access without needing any cabling, any infrastructure. Okay, let's move on a little bit here. See what we have. Love it. Love it. Bring it on, I say. It's so interesting today. I feel like we are learning more and more. Day by day, we're learning more and more about what's happening in Eastern Europe. But we're also learning more and more about the characters involved, the cast of characters. And I was saying earlier that, all of the people that support Donald Trump, who are also seeing what Putin is doing to the Ukrainian people, are probably now starting to question why Donald Trump is a friend of Putin's. Why he befriended Putin. What is it that Putin has done that makes Trump so, adoring of him? And the answer is pretty simple, isn't it, if you think about it? The answer is fundamentally compromat. It's compromat with a K, which is the Russian word for blackmail. And we know all about this. It's famously reported. The PP tape is a big part of it. But there's a whole bunch of other compromat probably lying around as well. And so, Trump will take Putin's side. He just will. Because he only cares about himself. And he did try and blackmail the Ukrainian president, Volodymyr Zelensky, when he was asking him to investigate Hunter Biden's laptop. I mean, it's like just all seems so trivial, stupid and pointless. It's so sad to me that we have been through this, we've lived through this period, this insanity. Vernon, welcome to the show from Ohio. Jean is with us as well. Solo, Abu, Tony, Mimi, Tutti Frutti, Carol, Marlene, and Stacy. Welcome, welcome, welcome. This is Backchannel. I'm Anthony Davis. Just a reminder that Backchannel has a growing list of shows, including Haley and Allison live, waking you up in the morning with lots of laughs and their one-star cinema review. Or Live Every Day with Liv Harrison, live from Texas, celebrating the little things in life with plenty of coffee. And what about the charming and funny Hal Rudnick, whose program, Your Pal Hal, directly follows this program at 11 o'clock Pacific. That's 2 o'clock Eastern. Backchannel, as you know, really is the only place that you can listen to, watch, and chat with live hosts right here on your device. And so that's why we make best use of it. So be my guest. Okay, let's return to some of the top stories. I want to continue kind of talking about Russia and Ukraine because I honestly feel like this is a subject that can fulfill us for the rest of this show, if that's okay with you, before we talk about Josephine Baker in about 20 minutes' time. Plans are now being drawn up. It's just been announced for Volodymyr Zelensky to address British MPs by a video link. He's expected to ask for more arms and repeat calls for an implementation of a no-fly zone. The president has given a series of video addresses from Kiev to parliamentarians around the world since the war began nearly a fortnight ago, both in private and in public. Over the weekend, he made a desperate plea to members of U.S. Congress in a private meeting for additional military aid, including planes, drones, and anti-aircraft missiles not currently supplied by the West. Well, Ukrainian sources said he would likely make a similar pitch to the British MPs, though a call for a no-fly zone has been rejected by NATO. And you understand why the no-fly zone is basically an impossibility at this stage. I mean, there's several reasons, but mostly, that really would be seen as like an act of world war. Meanwhile, I don't know if you're aware of this, but Donald Trump yesterday made an announcement in a speech to Republican donors in New Orleans. Carl, I don't know if you've heard this. He said the US should put the Chinese flag on F-22 jets and bomb the crap out of Russia in retribution for its invasion of Ukraine. He said, and then we say China did it, we didn't do it, China did it, and then they start fighting with each other and we sit back and watch. This is what Donald Trump said yesterday. Trump also called NATO a paper tiger. Said the US military had won skirmishes against Russian troops while he was president and claimed to have been tougher on Putin than any other US leader, which is obviously not true. None of that is true. Trump has faced severe criticism for praising the Russian leader since the invasion began. He also said the invasion was wrong. In his speech to around 250 of the Republican Party's top donors at the elite Four Seasons Hotel, Trump echoed GOP talking points against Joe Biden, claiming Putin would not have invaded Ukraine if he, Trump, had still been in power. He said, I knew Putin very well. He would not have done it. He would never have done it. Well, of course, he probably wouldn't. You know why? Because he already was controlling America. Putin had Trump and the United States exactly where he wanted him. That's the whole point, isn't it? He was laughing, thrilled. Russia interfered in the 2016 US election to benefit Donald Trump. The investigation of that interference produced criminal convictions of Trump aides and extensive evidence Trump may have attempted to obstruct justice. As president in Helsinki in July 2018, Trump deferred to Putin in public and met with him in private without close aides. In 2019, Trump held up military aid to Ukraine in an attempt to get dirt on Biden, resulting in the first of 2 impeachments. Nobody has ever been tougher on Russia than me, Trump said in New Orleans. The Washington Post reported that Donald Trump also praised Kim Jong-un, the North Korean dictator, for having total control of his country. Trump had no friends, or has no friends. Think about this for a second. We're talking about a guy that doesn't have a single solitary friend in the world. Nobody is Donald Trump's friend. Nobody ever has been, and nobody ever will be. He uses people, people use him, but he has no friendships. And so publicly, the only people that he could really connect with and befriend were autocrats, dictators, authoritarians. And to celebrate Kim Jong-un and say he's got total control of his people and think that that's a wonderful thing. Or to say that Putin, his word is more valuable than the word of his own security services who said he interfered with the election. How many clues do you need to realize that Trump is compromised? That Trump is a Russian asset? This is not a conspiracy theory. All of the experts on this say that Trump was a Russian mark. He, for 20 years plus, is somebody who the Russians have been manipulating, controlling. Oh, this started decades ago when Trump was seeking to, invest in Moscow, to build a Trump Tower in Moscow, and he was borrowing money from Russia because none of the US banks would lend to him anymore. So, they were lending him money. Trump attacked 2 Republicans who've rejected the lie, or the big lie, the Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell, who Trump called stupid, corrupt, and his own former Vice President Mike Pence, who presided over certification of the electoral results after the riot at the US Capitol. Several people said Trump talked too long and sounded like he was rambling in the last 30 minutes during this speech. It says under legal pressure over his business and political affairs, Trump seems set to run again in 2024. He remains the dominant presence in polls of the possible field. In New Orleans, he said of the next nominee, I wonder who that might be. Apparently, the crowd broke out singing Trump. They love him. They absolutely love him. We basically have a Russian asset as the leader of the biggest party in America, right? Somebody who is compromised, who has no intellect, who is completely unfit for the role of president, and they love him. And in fact, the more outrageous, the more racist, the more far right he behaves, the more they love him. Just be aware of that for a moment. Just be aware of the fact that that's the direction America is going. Somebody who hates immigrants, who wants to block people from entering the United States, who wants to not be on the world stage and support these various treaties, such as the Paris Climate Accord or the Iran nuclear deal, who doesn't believe in NATO or the United Nations. He basically is completely isolationist. People love him. And he knows it, and he doesn't care, because all he wants is to win. He doesn't like America, doesn't care for America as a concept, as an experiment, doesn't even think about America, doesn't know anything about it, never read the Constitution. The guy is a moron. Do you remember when his own senior staff member said that? I'm trying to remember who it was now. Who was it that he actually called him a something moron? And it was famously quoted and then misquoted and then requoted again. And it was very funny. I think it was it McMaster? And it's like, they know exactly what Trump's deal is, you know? I'm just looking it up. It was... It was Rex Tillerson. That's right. I remember that. There's a whole list of people here who've called Trump various things. Jim Mattis, Defense Secretary, said Trump had the understanding of a 5th or 6th grader, according to accounts in Bob Woodward's book. The comments came after a National Security Council meeting in which Trump questioned why the government was using resources to maintain a U.S. military presence on the Korean Peninsula. Mattis told Trump that the presence was necessary in order to prevent World War III. White House Chief of Staff John Kelly called Trump an idiot and said he thought the president was unhinged. Kelly had referred to the president as an idiot multiple times, in addition to making several remarks insulting the president's intelligence and casting himself as the savior of the country. Kelly's denied that he ever called Trump an idiot. Omarosa, do you remember her? She was the highest-ranking African-American staffer in the West Wing. She wasn't there for very long. She published a book saying that Trump is a racist, misogynist, and bigot. Her book's called Unhinged. She says she witnessed Trump use racial slurs whilst describing presidential counselor Kellyanne Conway's husband, George Conway, who's half Filipino. Lovely. What a lovely guy. Michael Wolff, in the book Fire and Fury, said a number of individuals in the Trump administration insulted the president's intelligence. Treasury Secretary Stephen Mnuchin, former Chief of Staff Reince Priebus, is his name Reince? Such a ridiculous name. Reince Priebus called Trump an idiot. Former economic advisor Gary Cohn said Trump was dumb as something, and former National Security Advisor H.R. McMaster, that's right, that's who I was thinking of, said the president was a dope. Steve Bannon said Trump was like an 11-year-old child. He said Trump had lost his step. Rex Tillerson called Trump a moron. The comments came after Tillerson had a meeting at the Pentagon with members of the White House National Security Team. And then at a dinner, McMaster mocked Trump, also calling him an idiot at the time. McMaster also said Trump was a dope with the intelligence of a kindergartner. Well, there it is. Yeah. I mean, he just doesn't have an intellect. The guy is an absolute moron, and yet still people think he's wonderful. They can't get enough of him. Laurie just joined us from Maine, by the way. Hello, Marilyn. Kyla, Vernon, wonderful. So, yeah, I wanted to talk about the no-fly zone, which is obviously something that's very important because The moment you impose a no-fly zone over Ukraine, this is to prevent Russian jets from bombing, right? That is, from Russia's perspective, considered an act of war, And that's the worrying thing about this, is that anything could set this off. And so this is why Biden is basically, reacting with extreme caution. Meanwhile, the US has been accused of hypocrisy for not supporting sanctions against Russia, for supporting sanctions against Russia, but not Israel. Yes, the US and some of its European allies are facing accusations of double standards for supporting sanctions and international war crimes investigations against Russia for its invasion of Ukraine while blocking them over Israeli military actions in the occupied Palestinian territories. But pro-Israel groups in the US have dismissed the allegations by accusing critics of exploiting Ukrainian suffering to draw false parallels. Last month, Amnesty International called for the UN to impose targeted sanctions against Israel after joining other human rights groups in accusing it of breaching international law by practicing a form of apartheid and committing a crime against humanity in its domination of the Palestinians. Palestinian officials and UN special rapporteurs on the occupied territories have also pressed for sanctions over Israeli land seizures in the West Bank, the blockade of Gaza, and the large-scale killing of Palestinian individuals. While pressing for action against Russia, however, the US and other governments have resisted similar measures against Israel. So Antony Blinken, he told the UN Human Rights Council last week that it must send a resolute message to Vladimir Putin to stop an invasion that has destroyed schools, hospitals, and residential buildings and killed hundreds of civilians. He says these are human rights abuses this council was created to stop. If we cannot come together now, then when will we come together? Savannah's joined us. Hi, Savannah. Jamie as well in California. Welcome to Backchannel. Laurie as well. These wonderful people spending their time with us. Blinken made the point of calling outgoing UN Human Rights Council investigations into Israeli actions in the occupied territories a stain on the Council's credibility and called for them to be halted. The investigations have found Israel responsible for persistent violations of the right to life and other crimes. Well, the former director of Human Rights Watch's Middle East division said there are clear parallels between Russia and Israeli violations of international law, including the committing of war crimes. Sarah Lee Whitson said, "We see that not just the US government, but US companies are falling over themselves to sanction and boycott anything that has an association with the Russian government. Contrast that with the exact opposite when it comes to sanctioning Israel for its violations of international law, to the point where American states are passing laws to punish Americans unless they promise never to boycott Israel. It's very clear that the grounds for resisting sanctions on Israel or even compliance with international law is purely political." I don't really know what to say. You know what I mean? It kind of, it says it writes itself. The reality is that Israel is a state that was created by the West and therefore has the support of the West, fundamentally, ultimately. No matter how many Palestinians are killed or, how much shelling goes on. Laura Friedman, who's the president of the Founder for Middle East Peace, contrasted American support for sanctions against Russia with attempts in Congress to outlaw boycotts boycotts in the US of Israel or its settlements in the Palestinian territories. James Zogby, president of the Arab American Institute in Washington, compared portrayal of Ukrainians throwing petrol bombs as heroic defenders of their territory to Palestinians characterized as terrorists or militants for resisting occupation and land seizures by Israel. The US is not alone in facing accusations of hypocrisy. The US and Canada led calls for the International Criminal Court to investigate Russian war crimes in Ukraine. Last year, the two countries said the ICC should drop an investigation of Israel in part on the grounds that Palestine is not a sovereign country, although it is recognized as a state by the UN. In Britain, a Labour MP, Julie Elliott, told Parliament there was a double standard when it comes to standing up for Palestinians. So how are Palestinians any different to Ukrainians, defending their sacred land against an invasion? How is it any different? Why does the UK and the US support Israel and not Palestine? Support Ukraine and not Russia? Are they the same? Do you see them as the same? The Palestinians are looking to us to speak and act in the same terms. We sanctioned Russia over Crimea, and we are now likely to impose more sanctions, with which I wholeheartedly agree. Yet Palestinians ask, why are we doing nothing to end Israel's occupation, she said. This is the British MP. Critics have also accused international footballing bodies of contradictory policies. UEFA fined the Scottish Premier League team Celtic after its fans flew Palestinian flags in international games, saying they were political symbols. Meanwhile, Ukrainian flags have been widely flown at recent soccer matches with the approval of footballing authorities. Landon has joined us. Welcome, Landon, to Backchannel. I'm Anthony. We're discussing Ukraine right now. You can get in touch. Just wake up your device, say the word "say," and then your message. Jonathan Greenblatt, chief executive of the Anti-Defamation League, a prominent pro-Israel group based in New York, said the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is a dispute over territory by two peoples who both have historic claims and connections. To compare this complexity to Russia's brute use of force against the sovereign and peaceful nation of Ukraine is to intentionally misrepresent the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and is deeply insensitive to the security and humanitarian crisis confronting Ukrainians today. But Ukraine is part of the former Soviet Union. So how is that a fair comparison? It's just very interesting to make the comparison and the hypocrisy of the US and the UK and various Western allied forces supporting Israel in their occupation of Palestine, and yet being on the side of Ukraine, who would be the equivalent of the Palestinians in their struggle against Russia. No, I think he doesn't do Mondays, does he? Hal does Tuesdays and Thursdays. I seem to remember. We're just discussing whether Hal is going to join us today, but I think Hal's in his own place today, doing his own thing. That's fine. The Pentagon's been giving its daily update to Defense Department reporters. The headline is that the US assesses that Russia has now committed almost 100% of the forces it had amassed for the Ukraine invasion. That means an estimated 127 battalion tactical groups. The Russian forces launched over 625 missiles, mostly short and medium-range surface-to-air missiles and cruise missiles. Well, I said this, and this is why I also said that I don't see why they need a no-fly zone, because a lot of these missiles, most of them, are not coming from air defenses, or aircraft. There are still no signs of Belarus troops inside Ukraine, no sign they are on the point of entering. Meanwhile, Russia is trying to recruit foreign fighters, especially Syrians, to take part in its war on Ukraine. There is no evidence of Syrian fighters actually arriving in Ukraine. However, the offensive on Kiev is still stalled, apparently. A doctor has joined us from Minnesota. Hello, Doctor. Landon is with us. Savannah, Jamie, Laurie, Marilyn, Kyla, and Vernon. Welcome to Backchannel. There are still no signs. Oh, I think I've read that. Oh, yes, they're saying that we're not seeing a lot of progress, according to a senior defense official, attributing it to the combination of stiff Ukrainian resistance and internal challenges within Russian forces. But the official cautioned that Russian troops are making more headway in the south, and Vladimir Putin still has a lot more combat power available to him. Arms supplies from the US and its allies are still making their way to Ukraine by land routes which have as yet not been threatened or closed. Over time, it could become more difficult, but we haven't seen that yet, according to a senior defense official. It's very interesting looking. There's a photograph I've been looking at of the talks between the Russians and the Ukrainians. And they're kind of sitting in this is a photograph that was taken today. A view of the third round of talks between Russian and Ukrainian delegations. I wonder if I can show it. Do you know something? I might be able to show this picture. Shall I give it a go? Let's see if I can do this here. Carla, what do you think about this? I'm going to try and show my... oh, hang on. What do I have to do? What do I have to do? What do I have to do to make this work? Here we go. Oh no, I can't do that. I can't do that. I don't know if it's going to work. No. I can see it, but I need to quit Chrome and reopen it in order for it to work. But I actually would have been able to do that, and that would have been kind of fun, you know? I've also reduced my picture quality to 720 from 1080, and it's improved my the quality of the image. Weirdly, you know. For some reason, the 1080p was blurry, and the 720 is fine. Yeah, but it's weird because I'm getting saying the network quality is great. Let me improve it and see if it changes again. I've got up to 1080p now, and I'm still getting green. Well, that's good. Okay. We're just, we're working on the technology all the time. The studio finally looks good, doesn't it? I finally got it. It's interesting. You look over the Backchannel shows over a period of time, and you see it slowly being built. And here we are, finally. Finally. I do love it in here. I spend an awful lot of time in this little room. I spend an awful lot of time in here, and I get the feeling that people think that it's some kind of vast space, and this is just a backdrop, and it really isn't. This is actual real. This is like a real thing. Kind of want to do something about these little dots here. I think that might be grey spray paint. Is that a problem or not? You don't think that's a problem? Okay. If you're happy, I'm happy. I'm happy if you're happy. Okay, let's move on because we've got lots to talk about. And I also very keen to talk about the Women's History Month. Four has joined us as well. Four's in Minnesota. If you guys want to message me at any time, you can go to backchannel.tv on your web browser. That's backchannel.tv, and you can chat there. You can also message if you have an Echo show. Wake it up, say the word say, and then your message. And we're also on YouTube, streaming as well. Just search for Anthony Davis Backchannel and do it like that. Okay, let's kind of continue with our chit-chat. I can't share this photograph with you, but it's a very interesting photo of these talks. Everybody looks completely terrified. They look like they're in some kind of bunker building somewhere. It's the third round of talks between Russian and Ukrainian delegations. And it's just very interesting to me that they're saying this was reported about half an hour ago. Small positive developments following third round of conflict talks. Relating to potential humanitarian corridors. The Reuters news agency reported a Ukrainian negotiator confirmed there had been small developments. The establishment of corridors to evacuate civilians from war-torn cities has proven difficult in recent days, with Ukraine accusing Russia of continuing its shelling bombardment. Civilians, including children, have been killed while trying to flee. It's very sad. It just shouldn't be happening at all. And meanwhile, you remember the nuclear power plant that was being shelled a couple of days ago? Apparently, Ukraine says it was a close call and must not under any circumstances be repeated, according to the International Atomic Energy Agency. The artillery attack on the huge plant in the southeast of the country was condemned around the world and denounced as a war crime by Ukraine and the U.S. Embassy in Kiev. No release of radiation was reported. The IAEA Director General, Rafael Mariano, made the comments at the opening of the Board of Directors meeting today at the agency headquarters in Vienna in Austria. He said Russian forces now control the management of the plant and the approval of technical decisions made by the Ukrainian operators. This is not a safe way to run a nuclear power plant, nor is it safe or sustainable for internal and external communications to have been disrupted and cut off. As it's been reported to us by the Ukrainian operator and regulator, I am deeply concerned about this turn of events. So the Russians now control the nuclear reactor, which in itself is completely terrifying. You know? And literally a moment ago it was announced that Russia has accused Ireland of failing to protect its ambassador and staff as required under international law. This is after a truck has reversed into the embassy estate, forcing open the gates in the process. Now, I watched the video of this happening earlier. He literally just backed this huge truck. It was some kind of industrial product truck. He left his truck in the gateway, handed out leaflets showing a picture of a woman and her child shot dead near Kiev that has caused shock around the world. He said, "I've done this to create a safe corridor for the Russian ambassador to leave Ireland, go through Poland, and walk through Europe. I've done it for this lady and her kids. It really affected me last night, and I'm doing it for them. I want the ambassador and his colleagues to leave this country, leave this free country." A Russian embassy spokeswoman said the incident took place in the presence of Garda officers who stood idle. The embassy strongly condemns this criminal act of insanity directed against a peaceful diplomatic mission. The embassy views this incident as a clear and blatant violation of Article 22 of the Vienna Convention on Diplomatic Relations of 1961. Apparently, a priest who's now been arrested threw red paint over the gates of the embassy last week. A priest in Ireland. Also in the southern city of Mariupol, police were going from basement shelter to basement shelter. The message to those who have been trapped by days of brutal Russian shelling in the besieged city of 430,000 people on the Sea of Azov was simple. Do not come out, they were saying. Until you hear a message on the loudspeakers, do not try to evacuate, despite promises by Russian forces of safe passage. Oh, this is interesting. So they're basically now explaining to people that the humanitarian corridors are fake. It's basically what they've now established, and they're sharing that information. The warnings were well founded. On the main road out, eyed as a key escape route, heavy Russian shelling continued on Monday. The previous day, officials of the International Committee of the Red Cross had identified it as having been mined. The route is not safe, said Sergei Orlov, the deputy mayor. We do not have confirmation at the moment that a ceasefire has started. The day after, 8 civilians, including a family of 3, were killed by Russian mortar fire while trying to evacuate from Irpin to the outskirts of Kiev. Analysts and political leaders were experiencing a sense of déjà vu, pointing to the cynical Russian use of humanitarian corridors in Chechnya, and more recently in Syria, where Russian or Russian-brokered promises of safe passage were either worthless or used as a ploy to allow the repositioning of forces. Yeah. When you're dealing with Putin, you're not really dealing with somebody who is fair. You know, there is no space in Putin's world for any kind of agreement. You know, this is not going to end well. It might not even end at all. Okay, listen, we've got 9 minutes left. Let's talk about Josephine Baker, because I'm very keen to focus on Women's History Month. This is something we do at the end of every show. Last month was Black History Month. World-renowned performer, World War II spy and activist. Few of the titles used to describe Josephine Baker, one of the most successful African-American performers in French history. Her career illustrates the ways that entertainers can use their platforms to change the world. On the 3rd of June 1906, Frida Josephine MacDonald was born in St. Louis, Missouri. Her parents, both entertainers, performed throughout the segregated Midwest, often bringing her on stage during their shows. Unfortunately, their careers never took off, forcing the young Baker to look for odd jobs to survive. If she was unable to find work, she would often dance on the streets, collecting money from onlookers. Eventually, her routine caught the attention of an African-American theater troupe. At the age of 15, Baker ran off and began to perform with the group. She also married during this time, taking her husband's last name and dropping her first name, becoming Josephine Baker. It's very interesting, isn't it? We were talking the other week about, people of the, from the US who you might not know. She was a dancer. She was in vaudeville shows. She was which was popular, as you know, in the early 20th century. She eventually moved to New York City and participated in the celebration of black life and art, now known as the Harlem Renaissance. A few years later, her success took her to Paris. She became one of the most sought-after performers due to her distinct dancing style and unique costumes. And there is footage on YouTube of Josephine Baker dancing, and she was kind of amazing. She had this shimmy. She had this shimmy that she did that was unmistakable. Although her audiences were mostly white, Baker's performances followed African themes and style. In her famed show, Danse Sauvage, she danced across the stage in a banana skirt. She was multi-talented, known for her dancing and singing. She even played several successful major motion pictures released in Europe. When Adolf Hitler and the German army invaded France during World War II, Baker joined the fight against the Nazi regime. She aided French military officials by passing on secrets she heard while performing in front of the enemy. She transported the confidential information by writing with invisible ink on music sheets. After many years of performing in Paris, she returned to the United States. Just think about that for a moment. She's performing on the stage, right? In Paris. She overhears German officers talking. She goes into the room afterwards backstage and writes it with invisible ink on sheet music. And I mean, just think about it. It's amazing. She's probably the last person anybody thought was a spy. Fantastic. Her return home forced Baker to confront segregation and discrimination. And she hadn't experienced since she was a child in St. Louis. She often refused to perform to segregated audiences, which usually forced club owners to integrate for her shows. Her opposition against segregation and discrimination was recognized by the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. In 1963, she was one of the few women allowed to speak at the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom. Her speech detailed her life as a black woman in the United States and abroad. She said, "You know, friends, that I do not lie to you when I tell you I have walked into the palaces of kings and queens and into the houses of presidents." She said this out loud. "And much more, but I could not walk into a hotel in America and get a cup of coffee, and that made me mad." Baker continued to fight racial injustices into the 1970s. Her personal life was a testament to her political agenda. Throughout her career, she adopted 13 children from various countries. She called her family the Rainbow Tribe and took her children with her on the road in an effort to show that racial and cultural harmony could exist. Baker remained on stage late into her life, and in 1975, she performed for the last time. The show was sold out, and she received a standing ovation. She passed away on April 12, 1975. Wow, isn't that crazy? She actually died the same year as her final performance. There's just so many people like this who we kind of, ignore at our peril. And hopefully a lot of people know the name Josephine Baker. And they recognize that, she was a tour de force. Somebody to be recognized and seen for their influence. And this is what I'd say about, doing your little bit. You don't have to change the world, just your little bit of the world. And if everybody changes their little bit of the world, then the world will change. Trent has joined us from Texas. Hello, Trent. Good morning. Z is in Michigan. 4 is in Minnesota. Doctor is with us as well in Crutchfield, Minnesota. Just in Minnesota. I think you're using the name Crutchfield. Landon, Savannah, Jamie. First time on the show, Jamie. Welcome. Laurie, Marilyn, and Kyla as well. And we've also enjoyed Vernon and Jean, Solo and Abu. Tony and Mimi has been with us. Tutti Frutti, Carol as well. Marlene. And Stacey was with us at the very top of the program here on Backchannel. As we looked through the events of the day, And if we do a little quick recap on what we did, and maybe if you like the sound of these things and you've never heard the show before, you can come back and join me tomorrow morning from 9 a.m. Pacific. That's 12 o'clock Eastern. We were discussing Russia opening up these supposed safe corridors and talking about how they've been mined and how they're anything but safe. We've been talking about the energy that has been, well, everywhere. You know, we've been feeling this new burst of energy from people supporting the Ukrainian people, including in Congress, and we were talking about that. Elon Musk choosing to side with Ukraine in a couple of tweets, which a lot of business leaders have refused to do. And also Women's History Month. The world-renowned performer and World War II spy and activist are a few of the titles used to describe Josephine Baker, and we looked at her life. And we looked through the morning papers as we went right across the country to Texas, Fort Worth, San Antonio, LA, Sacramento, San Diego, Columbus, Ohio. And this is what we do on this show. We go right across the country and we look at local newspapers, the St. Louis News-Tribune in Florida or the Orlando Sentinel. Read up, find out some very good local journalists doing their thing who are basically digging out the dirt, putting it on the front of their local newspapers, and then the national newspapers, the big newspapers, occasionally pick those up. The New York Times, the Washington Post, the LA Times, the larger newspapers, and run with those stories. And so it's nice to kind of champion those stories, you know, from early on. Listen, thank you for joining me today. What a privilege. Enjoyed it enormously. Carla had a great time. She's in London. She sat back and she's like, this is great. Well, I enjoyed myself. Don't forget, Volley continues throughout the day. We have dozens of hosts now, 5 days a week, right through the day, 12 hours a day. You can tune in via your Echo show at any time and have a little friend sitting in the corner of the room chatting away that you can join in with. The next little friend is your pal Hal. He's next. Have a great day.